your martial arts movie podcast.
I threw that shit before I walked in the room.
Featuring drunken Thai boxer Will.
Too bad you will die.
The also drunken wrestler Mark.
I said I don't want trouble.
And drunken karate master Zero.
You've lost your balls.
And now,
Talk. I know Kung Fu.
You know, baby.
Fists of Fail.
All right, Zero, I think this episode's a little cursed. Mm-hmm. This is the first time we've ever flubbed, or I've flubbed this, but this is our second time recording this intro for this episode because I lost the file. So we're doing this intro again.
Well, not just you. I also lost the file, so...
It's a joint flub up.
Yeah,
this movie's cursed.
It's a joint mess up. It's a joint curse. Now this is our zombie recording because we're trying another pass. But we have the detailed Patreon section already made, and we have our recommendations saved. It's just part one of this where we do our general summary. Unfortunately, it got lost in the mail.
Lost in the mail because it's a haunted. Ooh. From what I remember, and this is actually, I still hold on to this thought very closely to my heart. This movie is very appropriate for Halloween. I remember saying that
I remember that too.
Vividly. I still feel that way because this movie, it's actually the closest we get to like a proper horror film, right?
Yeah.
Like in terms of being a martial arts movie, and wait, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Human Lanterns, the movie title that kind of gives away one of the more interesting twists in the movie, actually.
I don't know. When I think about it, so watching the movie, I guess I was super oblivious to what the title was about. It's like, oh, Human Lanterns. It could literally be anything, and I was half expecting it to be supernatural, which, surprise, surprise, it's not. It's not at all. It's almost like a serial killer, like horror film kind of way, right?
It's pretty much a thriller. Yeah, I mean, we literally do have a serial killer. He's going around kidnapping women, unfortunately, torturing them, and then creating said human lanterns. I think we could spoil exactly what it is, but we can get into that a little later.
Sure.
But I do agree with you. This is probably our most appropriate horror / martial arts mashup because it is exactly that. A lot of times in the Hong Kong movie sphere, mainly I think because of Sammo's influence, it was martial arts, horror, and comedy that we were generally getting. And this one is strictly martial arts and horror, so it's kind of refreshing, especially because we also covered Against the Dark, and that movie was absolute garbage. So,
well, this is 1982. This is a few years before the Mr. Vampire series and Encounters of the Spooky Kind. So it's kind of strange because we're talking about Hong Kong, which is a culture at the time that was very superstitious and were not very much into the supernatural. In fact, there's a general fear of ghosts, and like horror movies were just not their forte. So, this movie doesn't have anything supernatural to it, but there's a lot of elements to it that are just like huge taboos in Chinese culture. So, like watching this, I'm like, wow, this actually starts to lean into a more explicit territory. And
do you think you can elaborate on that, actually? Because I don't know what the taboos are exactly.
I mean, you don't really, you don't desecrate bodies like this.
I
really,
see. Right. Well, I mean, I don't think you're supposed to do that in any culture.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. But I mean, I feel like Chinese audiences were very squeamish back then. And okay, this is early 80s. I mean, yeah, some of the effects are a little bit dated. But I mean, everything obviously is practical, but there's a general sense of good production quality throughout the whole movie. Okay, if you recall, like the sets were looked really swell. There's like very massive sets in general because this is a Shaw Brothers film, but also because they have the production value to it. But every once in a while, you'll see like skin being peeled, and you're like, oh, that looks like paper mache.
Right. So I'm not the biggest fan of super realistic gore. I'm not a gore hound at all. And I do appreciate cool gore effects, like maybe like the 90s Savini stuff. But I think I think watching this was fine for me because of the dated effects. Like if I were to watch a modern remake of this and we literally see a guy peeling off a woman's skin and it's realistic looking, I would like that would just be too much for me. The fact that it looks like somebody took Elmer's glue, the white Elmer's glue, let it dry, and it's just slowly peeling it away. That makes it a more palatable, I guess, for me.
Yeah. And somehow this guy is able to just peel off all in one piece. Meanwhile, like I get a canker sore, and it's anyways. Well, what's the story, Zero? Do you remember, or should I elaborate? It's actually pretty simple.
Yeah, the story is pretty simple. If I were to make it, I mean, I can literally make it really simple. So basically, these two local, I guess, aristocrats, very, very well-off men. They're kind of rivals, and they bicker and they hate each other. And because one of the men, played by Quan Tai Chen, he kind of gets the main character's, I guess, prostitute, like his favorite prostitute, invites her to a party in order to embarrass the main character, who's played by Tony Liu. And because of this, like, he loses face, and so what he wants to do is he wants to beat him in the Lantern Festival. Oddly enough, of all things, I mean, rich people, when they have money, they enter these really strange contests. But anyway, so
I'm gonna invest in crypto.
Exactly. I want the best lantern NFT. I'm gonna go to this really strange artist. So anyway, actually, Tony Liu goes to this eccentric lantern maker who turns out he had a physical fight with him years back that we find out in a flashback. He hires him to make a lantern that will just blow anything that Quan Tai Chen makes out of the water. It's going to be the best lantern in all the land, and all the, of all the lanterns ever made. And that pretty much starts the ball rolling, because this lantern maker, played by Lolier, he was defeated by Tony Liu in the past, and surprise, surprise, he's still holding a grudge against him. So this kind of sparks the serial killer instinct in him and causes him to go on a killing spree in order to collect, quote-unquote, materials to use for the lanterns he's going to make for Tony Liu.
Yeah, I already lightly spoiled how he does it, but it's pretty gruesome sometimes. I mean, like, yeah, of course. Looking past the effects itself, like the idea of what he's actually trying to do, it's unsettling.
It's disturbing, especially because the first kill, we linger on it because they really want to let us know what he's doing and how uncomfortable it is, and just how gruesome the whole ordeal is becoming in him making these human lanterns. Like, we linger on it. It makes us feel uncomfortable. Thankfully, with each killing, we don't get like 10 minutes of him like giggling and peeling and repeating the whole thing. Like, we get it after the first one, but they really just want to let us know, hey, this is a really horrific thing that this bad guy is doing for Tony Liu, who is also just a pretty horrible person, in order to try to, defeat Quan Tai Chen in the Lantern Festival, who is also kind of a horrible person too. Like, all the men in this movie are just like horrible people.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, yes, Tony Liu, he's kind of really the main character of the movie.
Yeah, he
right?
is. Yeah.
You're following him throughout the whole film, and yeah, he's a terrible audience surrogate because he's just a terrible piece of shit. He speaks down to his wife. He clearly has like an ego to him of sorts.
Yes.
So like you definitely don't root for him. Like, there's really no one likable throughout the whole film. So basically what perfect horror movie fodder. And this is all set up for kind of what happens at the end. You know, like kind of, but I don't know how to mention any more of that without spoiling the movie.
Right.
But yeah, like with everyone being an asshole, you're expecting the assholes to get their comeuppance, but instead it's all the innocent women in the film.
Yeah, that's kind of the frustrating thing. I mean, sure, in all these martial arts movies, at the end, they kind of have to write in people, you know, getting what they deserve. But for me, after the rewatch, it didn't feel as cathartic as I was hoping, because the whole movie, you're just stuck with these guys. They're so unlikable. They're so irredeemable. The way that they get what's coming to them at the end, for me personally, didn't feel like it was deserved. And because the women in the movie, the very innocent women in the movie, are the ones who unfortunately have to succumb to this like these brutal and horrific deaths.
Yeah. But somehow we enjoyed the movie. Like, yeah, this movie's great somehow. I mean, okay, yeah, like looking past the, you know, like how irredeemable the characters are and the poor treatment, very dated treatment of women in this movie. You know, the movie still has some genuinely entertaining qualities to them because, like we said before, it's a actually great mashup of horror and martial arts, which we've been doing the show for like 3 years now, and it's like, well, we finally found one that's like, it feels like it's appropriate. One, because it's not there's no supernatural elements to it, and two, like the serial killer, you know, played by Lo Lie, he is a genuine threat. Like both the fact that he has this like devious plan to, you know, kill people, but also he's a real physical threat. You know, like no one can match him. You know, when the movie continues on.
Yeah.
So.
It's kind of weird. So, like, just going back a little bit to that horror aspect, Lo Lie, when he's kidnapping the women, he dons this outfit where he has this skull mask, and then he has like a red lion's mane, and he moves kind of like a monkey a little bit. You know, like doing that kind of monkey pantomime movements. It's not scary. But, like, there are moments, because, like, the cinematography in this movie is actually really beautiful. I love the way this movie looks. There's this one moment, though, where Lo Lie is, like, kind of creeping behind Tony Liu's wife. And, like, you can't see his body, and all you see is the skull and the hair. And it looks like it's just a floating skull in the background because of how he's lit. I was like, oh, that's genuinely creepy. That's pretty cool. That they were able to like infuse these horror, like serial killer elements in this movie, but then at times when you see the costume lit, which you really shouldn't, like you know what I mean? Like you shouldn't, you don't want to see the xenomorph alien in full light because it kind of ruins some of that mysticism. Like there are scenes when he's kidnapping women in daylight, and it kind of ruins any sort of, I guess, threat or horror to it, because you just see him and he's like grabbing on the trees like a monkey, and you're like, okay, this guy must be sweating because that thing looks really hot.
Yeah, I will say, if it weren't for the fact that the story sometimes needed to, well, I mean, for the most part, it needed to hide his. It's not a big major spoiler. It's so obvious that it's him. By the way, you know, like it's Lo Lie. Like when you realize that there's this monkey mask guy running around attacking women, you know, like it's clear as day as Lo Lie's character.
Yeah.
But you know, while you're watching the movie, like like none of the characters know because he's behind this mask. He is not really that menacing while he's in the garb. He's actually pretty terrifying once he's actually, you know, it's just Lo Lie just torturing women.
Yeah. That's like, where the real horror actually stems from. Him being like this goofy monkey man is not really, it's not really threatening at all. But I will say, when it comes to the action, and I'll skip forward just a little bit, he is overpowered to hell. Yeah. Like nobody can fucking touch this guy, and it's just it just makes there's a 10-minute action scene at the end of the movie. It goes on because he cannot be defeated. He's fucking invincible.
I will say though, the movie kind of falls apart at the end. One in the action department, like, and yes, the final segment is very action packed, but in terms of the story, I'm like, what happens from the action, and you'll know more when we get to break it down even more in the action segment. If it weren't, I don't know, like it doesn't make much sense, and it just kind of falls apart at the end. Like even the epilogue in the movie, it's like, we really didn't need this. But for the most part, like, well, action wise, I think the movie is just okay. You know, if we're just talking about the action generally, because we're entering the early 80s. Like we haven't hit the peak of the 80s action Hong Kong action movies yet, no, in terms of fight choreography, but this is starting to teeter into that realm of, you know, much better fight choreography. It's not so dancey, it's not so pantomime-y, it's not so like metronome. I mean,
yeah,
you know, I feel like everyone for the most part is starting to evolve their craft a little bit, and then we get some Shaw Brothers veterans that come in every once in a while, and they get a fight scene. And I noticed that that's when the old school Shaw Brothers timing of fights starts to show its face. But for the most part, I remember the action being, you know, pretty, you know, okay. It's nothing to write home about, though.
Right. It's kind of interesting because we get the longer takes, we get the appropriate amount of editing and different camera angles to vary things up. For me, it's definitely the speed where I notice, like, okay, still not feeling natural where somebody would throw these moves at full, at their full power. Like they're kind of just, it almost feels like we're watching previs. Because it's at a slower pace. They're just, people are trying to get the timing and the blocking right. For us, we know people can be faster, so this looks a little slow to us. But you know, it's just how they fought at the time, so it's not. Yeah. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe using the word like, part of me wants to use the word primitive, but it's like it's like a prototype, you know. Yeah. I mean, like that's what we're gonna always echo whenever we talk about like older Shaw Brothers movies. But you know, it's not the late 70s anymore. You know, where we are starting to move in more towards like the more like faster pace. And you know, the movie's not terrible, and you're right. Like when it comes to the cinematography and the editing, you know, like they make good steps to make sure that it's always interesting, and it does help that there's genuine tension pretty much in every fight scene. Mm-hmm. Like even though you're not technically rooting for anybody, because you hate everyone in the movie, like you generally like feel that there's like a good amount of tension because the villain is just so diabolical and so evil, and also his plan of getting these two characters to fight one another, like it's palpable, like that, you know, like the tension between them, and the movie just keeps on escalating. So like, you know, the movie never feels like there's a lull technically until we get to the end. But whatever. I already said my piece about the movie falling apart as the movie goes on.
So for me personally, I don't think the movie falls apart at the end. I just think I think I would have removed that epilogue in the end. Like I think well, I mean, this is a Hong Kong film. I think if we freeze frame that amazing fiery inferno at the end and cut the credits, like I would have been perfectly fine with that.
Right. All right, well, we're getting very into the weeds of the details in the movie, so I guess this would be a good time to talk about spoilers. Go into the movie a little bit more, right, Zero?
Yeah, sounds good. So, if you want to hear more specifics about the story, and if you specifically spoilers, and if you want to hear a more detailed action breakdown, because we're going to go into it, generally we go about an hour. So if you want more of that, you can subscribe to us on Patreon. It's only $1 a month, and you get bonus episodes. You could hear us talk about The Gray Man or The Champions with Yoon Bio. That was a fun one you released that you forgot to release that I had to remind you about.
Jeez. Yeah, just, I'm always one step behind, but I'm catching up. All right, but yes, you can listen to all our exclusive content. When we get them to release, we're about to release another one, another horror episode coming out soon for a quick job, but we'll leave that as a little teaser for you guys. So, but anyways, on to the spoiler section. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. We're at the point where we give our recommendations, but there's a whole wealth of audio you would be listening to here if you follow us on Patreon. There you can listen to the entire episode, including an exclusive action breakdown of the fights in the movie. And now on to our final thoughts.
Yeah. But that's basically
it.
Human Lanterns.
Yeah, that's Human Lanterns.
Very simple story. Very simple. But good film. Good horror.
They're lanterns made out of humans. if you couldn't tell by the name.
Human Lanterns is people. Very good pick, I think. Hell, if you asked if we wanted to do this for the end of the month, I would have been like, hell yeah, this would have been the ultimate Halloween movie, because it's quite literally the perfect definition of a horror film. Not the scariest, obviously. I don't think that's even because of the fact that this movie's dated, but because it quite feels like a horror film. It's not a horror comedy. It's not like horror with a little bit of horror with a little bit of martial arts in it. It's like it actually is a perfect,
it's a good blend of horror and martial arts. Yeah,
It then feels like it's like, oh, we need to have. It's not gimmicky, right? It's not like, oh, it's a martial arts movie with a little bit of horror in it. It's like, no, it's just straight up a horror film, and I kind of like that about the movie. It didn't need to go into the supernatural territory at all, which I do appreciate the film for that. It's kind of slow at times, though. I won't lie.
Yeah. It gets a little slow because we don't get fighting until the hour mark. So if you're looking for action, you kind of have to wait for that a little bit. But I mean, if you want that horror martial arts itch, then they're setting up the pieces. We get the serial killer moments. You get the atrocities that Lolier is doing as this weird monkey man skull-faced killer.
Ghostface Killer sure called himself that. Weird monkey man skull-faced killer. Yeah. This is a really good definition of the horror martial arts movie. I'm actually kind of surprised that we didn't see this before. So good horror, good October pick, I think, much more than Against the Dark for sure. I would recommend it just to watch it from that standpoint as a horror movie, with a little bit of action in it, coming from especially from this era. And I think that the martial arts is just okay. It's a stepping stone for bigger and better martial arts like later in down the line. But it's not too bad. I think the story is just super simple, but because of these horror tropes, it's kind of like what sells it for me. So yeah, that's my recommendation for this movie. Zero.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything with that. I'll say that this was a tougher watch the second time. It felt like a little slower for me, as to where the first time I was absorbing the information. I was getting to understand the strife between the main characters, Tony Liu and Quan Tai Chen. Yep. And then in this second rewatch before we spoke about it, I don't know, for some reason I wasn't as engaged as I thought I would be. I found myself checking out just a little bit, but then once we hit the hour mark and we start to get a lot more action, and then we get the bananas over the top ending, almost 10 minutes worth of fighting, it really sucks you back in, because Lolier, our villain, just won't fucking die. And that's all I could want from a martial arts movie. I want our heroes and the police and everyone to just beat the shit out of this guy and set themselves on fire at the end.
Well, I will say that this movie is dated on certain aspects, obviously, because the treatment of women in the film. But if you can look past it, good film to watch. I feel like if they ever remake this movie, it would be fair to both sexes. It would be kill women and kill men, and then you'll be wondering why do some of the Human Lanterns look like that and the other ones have pubes on them?
Oh. Are you saying that only men don't shave their pubes and women do?
Well, that one has chest hair, so I guess.
Okay, sure.